Okay, so today we're going to really get into French pastry.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, so we're diving into The Art of French Pastry by Jackie Pfeiffer.
Ah, yes.
And, our listeners are interested in gaining knowledge quickly and thoroughly. And so we're going to be looking at some of the most important stuff that Jackie Pfeiffer talks about in his book.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be looking at things like key equipment,
Sure.
essential ingredients,
Always important.
and some of the really foundational techniques that he talks about in his book.
Yeah.
And our goal with this deep dive is to give you those aha moments that you're looking for.
Yes.
Without overwhelming you with too much information all at once.
We're going to try to keep it digestible.
Yeah, digestible, exactly.
To the point.
And so the deep dive that we're doing today is going to be based on excerpts from Jackie Pfeiffer's book, The Art of French Pastry, as I mentioned.
Of course.
And we're going to be focusing on excerpts from his preface, the essential section, which covers equipment and ingredients.
And then we're going to be looking at snippets from the beginnings of several of his recipes that he shares in the book.
Right.
So those recipes include simple syrup, flour and butter mixture for cake pans, streusel, pâte chaud,
Okay.
brioche, puff pastry.
Wow. Quite a range there.
Yeah.
That's great.
Vanilla sauce, which is also known as crème anglaise,
Yes.
pastry cream, almond cream,
Caramel.
caramelized almonds and hazelnuts,
Oh my goodness.
hazelnut praline paste, chocolate nougatine crisp,
Wow.
Italian meringue, buttercream, French meringue, ganache, and chocolate mousse.
It's like we're running a bakery right here.
Yeah,
Just listing all that stuff.
It's making me hungry.
Me too.
But yeah, so we're going to be taking a look at the beginning of each of those recipes just to get a good overview of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And our mission with this deep dive, as I mentioned, is to extract the most important insights and practical knowledge from these foundational sections.
Yes. And hopefully by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a solid understanding of the core principles behind successful French pastry.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Jackie Pfeiffer shares his story in the preface of his book.
Okay.
And it's a fascinating one.
I'm sure it is.
He grew up in Alsace,
Okay.
and he grew up in his father's bakery.
Wow, so he was immersed in it from the very beginning?
Literally immersed in it.
Yeah.
So he talks about, just always being surrounded by these incredible smells.
I bet.
The sounds of the bakery.
Oh, yeah.
The rhythm of baking all day, every day.
Amazing.
Yeah, he says that the aroma of fresh bread was his alarm clock until he was 15.
Wow.
So you can just imagine.
I mean, that's idyllic in a way, isn't it?
It's idyllic, but it's also like, that was his life.
Yeah, 24/7.
Yeah, and so it really paints a picture of a life that's completely intertwined with this craft of baking.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that, it's interesting because you can really see how that constant exposure to the world of baking really shaped his understanding of work and discipline and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you grow up like that, you kind of...
It's in your blood.
It's in your blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have a completely different understanding, I think, of the rhythm of that kind of work and the dedication that it requires. And
yeah, and I think that's a good point, too, is that he really talked a lot about the dedication that it takes to be a successful pastry chef.
yeah,
So he wasn't just, smelling the bread all day.
he was working.
He was working. He was doing chores from a very young age.
Yeah.
So he talks about cleaning those greasy baking pans.
Yeah.
Which, let's be honest, nobody likes to do.
Nobody likes to do this out.
Peeling apples endlessly,
No.
just all of the not so glamorous tasks.
Yeah, the grunt work.
Yeah, the grunt work. But he talks about how important those tasks were in instilling in him a really powerful work ethic.
Yeah.
And a sense of discipline, which he really emphasizes throughout the book as being absolutely vital if you want to master any kind of artisan skill.
Right. And it's interesting. He started with these kind of more basic tasks and then moved on to...
Yeah, so even as a child, he had this creative spark.
Okay.
He would constantly ask his mom for scraps of dough.
Oh, that's cute.
And he would spend hours shaping them, and he even had access to the residual heat from the brick oven after all the bread was baked.
Wow.
And he would bake his little creations
Oh, that's amazing.
in there. And he even talks about using Baby Bell cheese wax.
The red wax.
Yeah, the red wax.
That's so
To
good.
make little figures.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's like from a very young age, he had this, this draw towards this artistry,
Absolutely.
which ultimately led him to pastry.
That's so cool. I mean,
Yeah.
you can really see how all those early experiences kind of shaped his trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, it's really inspiring for anyone who's, interested in learning a new skill or pursuing a craft, to see that, it's often those early experiences that plant those seeds.
Yeah, those seeds of passion.
Yeah.
And, developing that kind of intrinsic motivation.
Yeah. And I think that, it's interesting because there's this tension that he talks about in the book between, his father kind of wanting him to maybe take over the family business,
Right.
but also cautioning him against the really demanding lifestyle of working in the food industry.
Yeah, of course, it's incredibly demanding, long hours,
Yeah.
physically strenuous.
Yeah, and I think, for Pfeiffer, there was always this pull towards something that felt a little bit more expressive than just baking bread.
Mm-hmm.
Like he really had this artistic drive, and that's ultimately where pastry kind of became this true calling for him.
It's an art form, really, isn't it?
It is an art form, and he talks about that a lot in the book.
Yeah.
It's not just about following a recipe.
Yeah.
It's about this act of creation. So he eventually pursued a pastry apprenticeship.
Okay.
And from what he describes, it was incredibly tough.
I can imagine.
He even says that there were times when he was tempted to give it all up.
Yeah, I bet.
But he persevered, and ultimately he recognized that this training, even that was so rigorous, was absolutely essential for building that foundational knowledge.
Right. You can't really cut corners.
You can't cut corners. You really can't. And he's very adamant about that throughout the book.
Yeah.
So it really highlights the dedication that it takes to truly excel in this field.
Absolutely.
And this kind of leads into an interesting point about learning.
Okay.
So Pfeiffer's own apprenticeship was very challenging.
Right.
And he actually contrasts that with the approach that he and his co-founder took when they founded the French pastry school.
Oh, interesting. So they decided to do things a bit differently.
Very differently.
Okay.
So while they maintained a high level of rigor in the training, they really wanted to create a more positive learning environment.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of a kinder, gentler approach.
Kinder, gentler, exactly.
While still, maintaining those high standards.
Yeah, absolutely. Still focused on those fundamentals.
Yeah.
But it was more about inspiring the students and grounding them in technique rather than breaking them down.
Right. More encouraging and nurturing kind of environment.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that reflects a wider shift maybe in culinary education in general. Right.
I think so.
Away from that kind of old school mentality.
Yeah, the kind of, you have to pay your dues type of mentality.
Right. You got to earn it the hard way.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I guess the core principles are still there, right?
The core principles are absolutely still there.
It's just the approach that's different.
The approach is different.
Yeah.
And I think that carries through into his book as well.
Okay.
So his goal isn't just to give you a collection of beautiful recipes.
Yeah.
It's really to teach you what it means to be an artisan.
That's a great goal.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that applies whether you're a home baker or a professional pastry chef.
Yeah, for sure.
So now that we've got that background, let's move into the actual tools of the trade.
Okay, the equipment essentials.
Exactly. So Jackie Pfeiffer emphasizes that it's really about investing in the right tools and really thinking about quality over quantity.
Okay, so it's not about having every gadget under the sun.
No, not at all.
It's about having the right tools for the job.
Exactly.
But
So the first tool that he talks about is a digital scale.
Oh, absolutely crucial.
Crucial. Absolutely crucial.
For pastry.
And he even recommends a specific model.
Does he really?
Yeah. He recommends the Doran scale PC400.
Okay.
And he talks about how it's incredibly accurate and durable.
That's important.
Very important.
You want something that's going to last.
And then for those really tiny amounts of ingredients, like a pinch of baking powder,
Yes.
he recommends a mini pocket scale
Okay.
that can measure down to 1/10 of a gram.
Wow, that's precise.
Very precise, and he's very clear on this point.
As he should be.
He says weighing ingredients is key.
Yeah.
And approximate cup measurement should really only be used as a very rough guide.
So he's a stickler for precision.
Oh, he is a stickler for precision.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, right, when you're dealing with pastry.
It makes perfect sense.
You need to be very precise.
And he explains, why that is.
Okay.
Because those approximate cup measurements can really vary so much.
Oh, yeah, depending on how you pack the flour and...
Depending on how you scoop.
Yeah.
Are you leveling it off with a knife? Are you
Okay.
just kind of scooping it in?
Exactly. And those little variations can really make a
It
difference.
can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And so he stresses that weight is a far more reliable and consistent standard.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so next up he talks about the digital candy thermometer.
Okay. Yeah,
And a major plus here is safety,
of course.
because you're not dealing with a glass thermometer.
Right. You don't want that shattering in your sugar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he recommends digital candy thermometers that have a built-in timer,
Okay.
a temperature function, and an alarm.
That's great. So it's like a multi-purpose tool?
Multi-purpose, exactly.
Yeah.
And he gives this really practical advice.
Okay, what's that?
Buy a replacement probe right from the start.
Oh, that's a good tip because those things can be hard to find sometimes
They can be.
when you need them.
And they're not that expensive.
Yeah.
So it's worth just having one on hand.
Yeah, good thinking.
He also points out that infrared thermometers,
Those are the ones you just point.
you just point and click,
Yeah.
aren't ideal for pastry
Okay, why is that?
because they only measure the surface temperature.
Oh, I see.
So they're not actually measuring the temperature of what you're cooking.
Right. You need to get in there,
You need to get in there.
into the heart of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then he says, when you're looking for a digital candy thermometer, you want to make sure that it goes above 300 degrees Fahrenheit
Okay.
because sometimes you're going to need that higher temperature range.
Makes sense.
And ideally, you want one that can switch between Celsius and Fahrenheit.
Right, because a lot of pastry recipes are in Celsius.
A lot of them are in Celsius.
Yeah, so it's helpful to have that option.
So next up is something as simple as a cutting board.
Okay.
But, even for something as simple as a cutting board, he has preferences.
I bet he does.
He prefers wood.
Okay.
He likes John Boo's boards in particular.
Those are good quality boards.
Very good quality boards. And to prevent them from slipping,
Yeah, because those can be a bit slippy,
they can be.
especially when they're new.
He recommends placing a rubber shelf liner or even just a damp paper towel underneath.
Okay, that's a good tip.
And then he gives this really practical piece of advice.
Okay.
If you do a lot of savory cooking as well as pastry,
Mm-hmm.
have a separate cutting board specifically for pastry.
That makes sense. So you don't get any flavors transferring.
Exactly.
Yeah, like garlic and onion and all that.
You don't want that in your beautiful pastry.
Definitely not.
Okay, so moving on to the rolling pin.
Okay, every baker needs a rolling pin.
Yeah, he recommends a wooden rolling pin.
Okay.
He says forget those fancy plastic or marble ones.
Yeah, what's wrong with those?
He says they can warp over time,
Oh,
and they don't have the same feel as a good wooden rolling pin.
So he's a traditionalist.
He's a traditionalist.
Yeah.
He recommends heavy wood, like beech or boxwood,
Okay.
and he acknowledges that those might be a little bit more expensive up front,
Mm-hmm.
but he says they're worth the investment.
Yeah, because they'll last longer.
They'll last a lifetime
Exactly.
if you take care of them.
Exactly, if you take care of them.
And what's his advice for cleaning them?
For cleaning, he recommends using a plastic scraper to get off any bits of dough.
Okay.
And he says avoid soaking it in water.
Yeah, because the wood can warp.
Exactly.
Okay.
So next up is parchment paper,
Oh, parchment paper, a lifesaver in the kitchen.
a lifesaver.
Yeah.
And he says, thank goodness you can find pre-sized sheets on Amazon these days. Oh, yeah, that's so convenient.
So convenient.
I love that.
Saves you all at a time.
Yeah, for sure.
And then he talks about silpats.
Oh, silpats are great.
He loves silpat.
They are a game changer.
He says they revolutionize baking.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when those first came out, it was like
A whole new world.
a whole new world.
Yeah, and he says they're fantastic for all types of dough, but
Mhm.
especially for laminated doughs.
Right, because those are the ones that tend to stick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And nothing sticks to them.
It's like magic.
It's like magic, and they're reusable,
Yeah, that's a big plus.
which is great.
Yeah, environmentally friendly.
And he says just remember to store them properly.
Okay, how do you do that?
So you want to roll them loosely
Okay,
or lay them flat.
don't fold them.
Don't fold them because that can create creases.
Right,
And he just thinks they're a really worthwhile investment.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I use mine all the time.
Okay, so then he talks about FlexiPan's silicone molds.
Okay, I'm not as familiar with those.
So they're also made by the same company that makes silpats,
Go ahead.
and they're really versatile.
Okay.
You can use them for baking. You can use them for molding.
Oh, interesting.
And the great thing about them is that you don't need to grease them.
Oh, that's a bonus.
And they're dishwasher safe.
Even better.
Okay, then we get to disposable pastry bags or piping bags.
Okay.
And he prefers the kind that are made of heavy plastic
Okay.
that have a slick interior.
So that whatever you're piping
Yeah,
slides out easily.
exactly. But they have a slightly sticky exterior.
So you can grip them.
So you can grip them. And so he says that while professionals will often dispose of these after a single use,
For hygiene reasons.
for hygiene reasons, home cooks can definitely wash and reuse them.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
And he says just be careful
Mm,
when you're washing them.
yeah, don't want to tear them.
Don't want to tear them.
Okay.
So moving on to tart pans.
Okay, tart pans.
He recommends metal rings or pans. And he prefers galvanized metal or stainless steel.
Okay.
And he says that, professionals will often lean towards rings.
Just the ring.
Just the rings, because they give you those really clean edges.
Yeah, I've seen those.
But he says for home bakers like you and me, pans with a removable bottom are probably a little bit more practical.
Yeah, I think so too.
And he specifically mentions the Matfer brand.
Okay, I've heard of them. They make good quality stuff.
Good quality stuff. And then strainers and sifters.
Oh, essential.
Essential. He says stainless steel is the only way to go.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And then just those everyday essentials, plastic rack, aluminum foil.
Crap.
He recommends getting those large restaurant quality rolls.
Oh, yeah, they're much more sturdy.
Much more sturdy and better value.
Better value. Yeah, I got that.
Cheesecloth for straining liquids, and then large and small stainless steel whisks.
Oh, yeah.
And he specifically mentions making sure you have a good balloon whisk.
Okay, for whipping cream and things like that.
For aerating.
Yeah.
Eggs,
Okay.
whipping cream.
And what about rubber spatulas?
Rubber spatulas. Yes, he says get those in a variety of sizes.
Okay.
And make sure you have some that are heat resistant.
Yeah, because you don't want them melting.
You want them melting.
Use.
And he actually advises against using silicone spatulas
Really?
for savory tasks.
The fucking thing. Why is that?
I guess because silicone can absorb odors and flavors.
Oh, that's a good point.
And then a good bowl scraper.
Okay.
Hard plastic with a rounded edge.
To get all those little bits out of the bowl.
All those little bits that you would otherwise miss.
Absolutely.
Metal spatulas, flat and offset.
Yeah.
Also in a variety of sizes.
Okay.
Stainless steel blades with either plastic or wood handles.
Okay.
Ceramic ramekins.
Oh, yeah, for individual desserts.
He recommends the Revel brand.
Okay.
And then this is really important.
Okay.
Closed-toe shoes.
Oh, yeah? Safety first?
Safety first. And he actually shares a little anecdote in the book.
Oh, what's that?
About dropping a paring knife.
Oh, no.
And thankfully, he was wearing closed-toe shoes.
Yeah, that could have been bad.
It could have been very bad.
Okay, so closed-toe shoes are a must.
A must.
Got it.
Sheet pans.
Okay.
He likes black steel
Okay.
for its even baking and heat retention.
Yeah, and those are really versatile.
Very versatile. You can use them for toasting nuts.
Yeah.
You can use them for cooling things down, like pastry cream.
That's a good point.
A good quality paring knife.
Okay, you can't go wrong with a good paring knife.
You can't go wrong.
Yeah.
And then a spider.
A spider.
Which is that slotted wire skimmer.
Oh, yeah, for deep frying.
For retrieving things from hot liquids.
Okay.
So if you're doing any deep frying, that can be a really useful tool.
Makes sense.
Bread pans in different sizes.
Okay.
Again, he mentions the Matfer brand.
Okay.
A pizza stone.
Oh, yeah, for that nice crispy crust.
For that even heat.
Mm-hmm.
Protective gloves.
For working with hot sugar and things like that.
Exactly. Right. Kitchen timers.
Yeah, you definitely need a timer.
Ideally one that also has a probe thermometer.
Oh, that's fancy.
So you can really monitor the temperature of what you're cooking.
Yeah, very precise.
An electric home ice cream maker.
Oh, okay.
If you're going to be tackling any ice cream recipes.
Which I'm sure some of our listeners are.
Yes.
Yeah.
A pizza wheel for cutting dough.
Okay.
And then this is more for professional kitchens, but a blast chiller.
Oh, yeah, those are amazing.
Which rapidly cools food.
Yeah, for food safety.
Food safety and preserving quality.
Yeah, they're great.
And then finally, a vacuum sealing machine.
Okay.
Which can be really useful for extending the shelf life of both your ingredients and your finished products.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He also mentions a few other odds and ends like a bench scraper, a pastry brush, a mandolin, and an apple peeler.
Well, that's quite a list.
It's an extensive list.
It is, but it really shows you that, being well-equipped
is important.
Is important in pastry.
So now let's move on to the ingredients.
Okay, the building blocks.
The building blocks, and Jackie Pfeiffer has a very simple philosophy here.
Okay, what's that?
Quality in.
Quality out.
Quality out.
Makes sense.
He's a big believer in using the absolute best quality and freshest ingredients that you can find.
Yeah, I mean, that goes for any kind of cooking, really, but especially pastry, I think.
Especially pastry.
Where you're dealing with such delicate flavors and textures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he really cautions against making substitutions.
Okay.
Unless you truly understand the chemistry involved.
Yeah, you got to know what you're doing.
I know what you're doing.
Because those substitutions can really backfire.
They can backfire big time.
Yeah.
So first up, flour.
Okay, the foundation of so many baked goods.
He explains that different types of wheat flour have different protein content, and this matters in baking.
It does, yeah.
So he stresses the importance of storing flour properly.
Okay, how do you do that?
He says in an airtight container. And he even mentions this FIFO system. First in, first out.
Oh, so you're using the oldest flour first?
Exactly.
Right.
So you're not, having flour sitting in the back of your pantry
Getting stale.
forever.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And he even cautions that if you don't store your flour properly, you might end up with bugs in it.
Oh, that's not good.
Nobody wants that.
Definitely not.
Right, so then he talks about sugar.
Okay, sugar.
And he points out that cane sugar and beet sugar are generally interchangeable in most recipes.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And he uses a variety of different sugars in the book.
Okay, what kind?
Granulated sugar, turbinado sugar, brown sugar, and confectioner's sugar.
Also known as powdered sugar.
Powdered sugar, or 10x sugar.
Yeah.
And he explains that each one is used for a specific reason in different recipes.
That makes sense.
And he notes that he doesn't have a lot of experience with sugar substitutes.
Okay, so he sticks to the real stuff.
He sticks to the real stuff. Okay.
And just like with flour.
Airtight container.
Airtight container for sugar.
Okay, got it.
So then active dry yeast.
Okay, now we're talking.
He reminds us that this is a living organism.
Yes, it is.
And so freshness is absolutely key.
You want that yeast to be alive and kicking.
Alive and kicking.
Yeah.
So he emphasizes proper storage, usually in the refrigerator. And he notes that all of his recipes are calibrated using active dry yeast.
Okay.
So if you're using a different type of yeast,
you might need to adjust the quantities.
You might need to adjust.
Okay.
Okay, then we have vanilla.
Oh, vanilla.
So for pure vanilla extract, his recommendation is Nielsen Massey.
Okay, I've heard of them. They're a good brand.
And he advises storing it in airtight jars.
Okay.
Away from direct light.
Right, to protect the flavor.
To preserve that delicate flavor. And he also suggests using your senses.
Oh, how so?
He says a good vanilla extract should have a really rich natural aroma.
Yeah, you should be able to smell that vanilla. Yeah.
Okay.
And he cautions against overusing it.
A little goes a long way.
A little goes a long way.
With good quality vanilla.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we have French style 82% fat butter.
Okay, now this is important.
This is very important.
For French pastry.
He says it's non-negotiable.
Okay.
For many French pastries.
Why is that?
That specific fat content,
82%.
82% is crucial for stability.
Okay.
Especially in laminated doughs.
Right.
And for achieving the right texture in many baked goods.
Makes sense.
He says that if you use lower fat butters, you can end up with collapse.
Oh,
and excess steam during baking.
So it really affects the final product.
It can really affect the final product.
Okay.
And his recommendation is plugra butter.
Okay.
Which is a European-style butter.
Yeah.
And, of course, you need to store it properly in the refrigerator or even the freezer if you're going to store it for a longer period of time.
Makes sense.
So heavy cream.
Okay, heavy cream.
He specifies a minimum of 35% fat content.
Okay, why is that?
To ensure that it whips properly.
Oh, okay, so it holds its shape.
Holds its shape.
Yeah.
And he really advises against using any substitutions here.
No skim milk.
No skim milk.
Okay.
Then we have eggs.
Eggs.
He prefers free-range eggs.
Okay.
And he points out that his recipes are calibrated for extra large eggs.
Okay.
Which typically weigh between 50 and 55 grams. So if you're using a different size egg,
you might need to adjust.
You might need to adjust.
Yeah.
And he gives a little tip.
What's that?
If you need to scale eggs in a recipe, he says just whisk them together.
Okay.
And then measure out the precise amount that you need.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Okay, so moving on to nuts and nut flours.
Okay.
He emphasizes using high-quality fresh nuts for the best aroma and flavor.
Yeah, you can really taste the difference.
You can taste the difference.
Yeah.
He notes that almond flour has a unique ability to absorb moisture.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's something to keep in mind. When you're working with it.
Yeah.
He often uses sliced almonds for decoration. Expert speaker.